The wind howled across the frozen landscape like a living thing. It carried ice and snow in thick clouds that made it impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. Research Station Aurora sat alone in the white emptiness of northern Greenland, a small collection of buildings that looked tiny against the endless ice. Inside the main laboratory, Dr. Park stared at his computer screen with tired eyes. He had been working for 16 hours straight, and his coffee had gone cold hours ago. The numbers on the screen made no sense. He ran the calculations again, hopping for a different result. The numbers stayed the same. That cannot be right, he said to himself. Was 42 years old and had spent most of his adult life studying ice. He knew glaciers better than he knew most people. He understood how ice formed, how it moved, how it trapped air bubbles from thousands of years ago. Ice followed rules. Ice made sense. But what his instruments were showing him did not follow any rules he knew. The door opened and walked in, brushing snow from her jacket. She was 10 years younger than, with sharp eyes that never seemed to miss anything. She worked as a climate scientist at the station, studying how the Arctic was changing over time. "You are still here?" she asked. "You should sleep." "Look at this," said, pointing at his screen. Walked over and leaned close to see the data. Her expression changed from tired to confused to something close to shock. "What am I looking at?" "Magnetic readings from the deep ice core we drilled yesterday, 3 kilometers down." "These numbers are impossible," said. "This would mean there is something metallic down there, something huge." "I know. A meteorite." Shook his head. "I thought that at first, but look at the shape of the magnetic field. Meteorites do not create patterns like this. This is too regular, too perfect." Was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind continued its endless screaming. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that something is buried under 3 kilometers of ice, something that is not natural." The next morning, called a meeting with the other senior scientist at the station. Dr. Lee was a geophysicist, a quiet man who spoke little but listened carefully to everything. He looked at the data without expression, his face revealing nothing. "How old is the ice at that depth?" asked. "Based on our core samples, at least 40,000 years," replied. "Maybe older." "So whatever this is, it has been there since before the last ice age." "Yes." Nodded slowly. "We need more data, better imaging." They spent the next 3 days running every test they could think of. They used ground-penetrating radar. They measured temperature variations in the ice. They analyzed the magnetic field from every angle. Each test confirmed what they already suspected. There was something down there, something large and metallic, something with geometric shapes that could not exist in nature. On the 4th day, managed to create a thermal image of the object. When she displayed it on the main screen, nobody spoke for several minutes. It was a ship. There was no other word for it. The object was roughly 200 meters long, with a curved body and structures that looked like wings or fins. It was clearly artificial. It was clearly not human. "We have to report this," said finally. "If we report this, they will take over," replied. "The military, the government, whoever. We will be pushed aside. We will never know what is down there." "She is right," said. "Once we tell anyone, we lose control. But if we investigate first, if we learn what this is before we report it, then we have something to bargain with." It was a risk. They all knew it was a risk. But they were scientists, and the greatest discovery in human history was sitting beneath their feet. How could they walk away from that? They began drilling in secret. They told the other staff at the station that they were doing routine ice core research. Nobody questioned them. The work was slow and difficult. The ice at that depth was ancient and hard, compressed by the weight of thousands of years. Their equipment struggled with the pressure. Strange things started happening. Instruments would malfunction for no reason. Computers would restart on their own. One night, all the lights in the station flickered at the same time. even though they ran on 3 separate power systems. Said it was just the cold affecting the equipment. Said nothing, but saw the worry in his eyes. After 2 weeks of drilling, they broke through into an air pocket. This should have been impossible. Air pockets did not exist at that depth. The pressure should have crushed any empty space long ago, but the readings were clear. There was open space down there surrounding the object. Lowered a camera through the narrow tunnel they had drilled. The footage was dark and grainy, but they could see enough. The camera showed the surface of the ship, covered in strange markings that might have been writing. The hull was dark, smooth, and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "It is real," whispered. "It is actually real." Felt his heart beating fast in his chest. He had spent his whole life studying the past through ice. Now he was looking at something that would change the future forever. Humanity was not alone in the universe. They never had been. "We need to go down there," he said. "We need to see it for ourselves." The others agreed. They began planning the descent, knowing that once they went down, nothing would ever be the same again. Above them, the Arctic wind continued to blow, carrying snow across a landscape that had kept its secret for 40,000 years. That secret was about to be revealed. The secret lasted exactly 6 days after the camera footage. Someone at the station noticed the unusual drilling activity. Questions were asked. Reports were filed. Within 48 hours, helicopters appeared on the horizon, carrying people who did not introduce themselves but expected their orders to be followed. Watched from the window as soldiers set up a perimeter around the drilling site. He felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger because they had lost control, just as had predicted. Relief because what they had found was too big for 3 scientists working in secret. They needed help. They needed resources. They needed people who knew how to handle the impossible. Sergeant arrived on the 3rd helicopter. She was a compact woman with a serious face and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. She wore a military uniform with no special markings, no indication of which branch she served or who she reported to. She found in the laboratory and sat down across from him without asking permission. "Dr. Park," she said, "I have read your reports, all of them. I need you to tell me honestly, is this real?" "It is real," replied. "I have spent my entire career studying ice. I know what belongs down there and what does not. That ship does not belong." Nodded slowly. "Then we have a lot of work to do." More helicopters came. More people arrived. Doctor was among them, who had spent 20 years preparing for a moment everyone told him would never happen. He was younger than expected, barely 40, with an energy that seemed out of place in the frozen silence of the Arctic. "I always believed," said when they met. "I always knew we were not alone. The universe is too big, too old for Earth to be special. And now here is the proof, buried in ice, waiting for us." The drilling continued, but now it was done with better equipment and more workers. They widened the tunnel, reinforced its walls, installed lighting and safety systems. It took another 2 weeks before the passage was ready for human descent. Volunteered to lead the first team down. Nobody argued with her. She had been there from the beginning. She had earned the right. The descent took nearly an hour. They traveled in a specially designed cage that lowered slowly through the narrow tunnel. The walls of ice pressed close on all sides, ancient and blue, holding secrets from before human civilization existed. Watched the depth counter climb. 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 2.5. At 3 kilometers, the ice walls suddenly ended. The cage emerged into open space, and everyone fell silent. The chamber was enormous. It stretched hundreds of meters in every direction, carved from the ice itself. And floating in the center, held by nothing visible, was the ship. It was even larger than their images had suggested. Its dark hull seemed to swallow the light from their equipment, giving it an appearance of being made from solid shadow. "How is it floating?" whispered. Nobody had an answer. They landed on a platform of ice at the edge of the chamber. From there, they had to walk. The ship was perhaps 50 meters away, hanging silently in the cold air. As they approached, noticed something strange. The air was not as cold as it should have been. At this depth, the temperature should have been well below freezing, but he could breathe without pain. His exposed skin did not sting. Reached the ship first. She stood before its hull, looking up at the strange markings that covered its surface. They were not like any writing system had ever seen. The symbols seemed to flow into each other, curves and lines that suggested meaning without revealing it. "There," said, pointing, "that looks like a door." He was right. A section of the hull was slightly different from the rest, with a seam running around its edges. It was roughly 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide, large enough for a person to walk through, large enough for something else to walk through too. "Should we try to open it?" asked. "We did not come all this way to stand outside," replied. She had insisted on coming with the science team, her hand never far from the weapon at her hip. Reached out and touched the hull. The moment her fingers made contact, light pulsed beneath the surface. It was soft and blue, spreading from her touch like ripples in water. The seam around the door glowed bright, and then the door simply slid open, disappearing into the hull without a sound. Warm air flowed out from inside the ship. It smelled like nothing could identify, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just different. Beyond the doorway was darkness, but as they watched, lights began to flicker on inside. Soft blue illumination spread through the interior, revealing a corridor that curved away into the ship. "It knows we are here," said. "It recognized us." "Recognized humans?" asked. "How is that possible? This ship has been buried for 40,000 years. There were no humans like us back then." "Maybe it was waiting for us. Maybe it was designed to wait." They entered the ship one by one. The corridor was made of material that looked organic, like bone or shell, but felt warm to the touch. The walls glowed with their own soft light, and strange patterns moved across them like living things. The floor was smooth and slightly soft beneath their feet. Felt like he was walking through a dream. Everything around him was impossible, and yet here he was, inside an alien spacecraft buried beneath Arctic ice. His scientific mind tried to categorize what he saw, to fit it into familiar frameworks. Nothing fit. This was beyond human experience, beyond human understanding. The corridor opened into a larger space, a room that seemed to be a junction between several passages. The ceiling was high and curved, and more of the flowing symbols covered every surface. In the center of the room was a pillar of crystal that pulsed with inner light. "There is no crew," observed. "No bodies, no sign that anyone was ever here." He was right. The ship felt empty, not abandoned but prepared. Like a house that had been cleaned and set in order before the owners left on a long journey. Everything was in its place, waiting for someone to return. "They left it for us," said quietly. "Whoever built this ship, they left it here on purpose. They wanted it to be found." The crystal pillar pulsed brighter, as if responding to her words. The light grew until it filled the room, and for a moment felt something touch his mind. It was gentle, curious, almost welcoming. Then it was gone, and the light returned to normal. "We need to explore more," said, his voice shaking with excitement. "We need to document everything. This is the greatest discovery in human history." Nodded, but he could not shake the feeling that they had only begun to understand what they had found. The ship had secrets to share, he was certain of that. But secrets always came with a price. He wondered what price this one would demand. Days passed inside the ship. The team worked in shifts, exploring every corridor and chamber they could access. They found rooms that might have been living quarters, stripped of personal belongings but still carrying the shape of use. They found storage areas filled with strange containers that held nothing but dust. They found what believed was an engine room, though the technology inside was so far beyond human understanding that calling it an engine seemed almost insulting. Everywhere they went, the ship responded to them. Lights turned on as they approached. Doors opened at their touch. It was as if the vessel had been programmed to welcome human visitors, to make them comfortable, to invite them deeper inside. But it was the central chamber that drew them back again and again. The room was located at the heart of the ship, accessible through a corridor that spiraled downward like the inside of a shell. Unlike the other spaces they had found, this one contained something clearly important. In the center of the room, on a raised platform made of the same organic material as the walls, sat a single object. It was a crystal, roughly the size of a human head, resting on a pedestal that seemed to grow from the floor itself. The crystal was not like any mineral had ever seen. It was perfectly clear, but inside it, lights moved and swirled like tiny stars. It pulsed with a slow rhythm that reminded him of breathing or of a heartbeat. Every system on this ship connects to this chamber, reported after days of analysis. Every power line, every data pathway, everything leads here. This crystal is the center of everything. Then we should activate it, said. We should see what it does. We should be careful, countered. We do not know what activating it might trigger. They debated for hours. They debated for days. In the end, it was who made the decision. He walked up to the platform and placed his hand on the crystal's surface. The world changed. Light exploded from the crystal, but it did not blind him. Instead, it surrounded him, lifted him, carried him somewhere else. He was no longer standing in the chamber. He was floating in space, surrounded by stars more numerous than he could count. Below him, a planet turned slowly, blue and green and white with clouds. It took him a moment to recognize it. Earth, he was looking at Earth. But it was Earth from long ago, before cities, before farms, before anything humans had built. Ice covered much of the northern regions, great sheets of white that stretched across continents. He was not alone. Something was with him, a presence that felt vast and ancient and somehow kind. It did not speak in words, but he understood it anyway. It was showing him a story. It was showing him the truth. The vision shifted. He saw other beings, creatures that walked upright like humans but were clearly something else. Their bodies were tall and thin, covered in skin that shimmered like oil on water. Their faces had no features he could recognize, just smooth surfaces with subtle indentations where eyes and mouths might be. They were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. These beings were watching Earth. They had been watching for a long time. They saw the ice ages come and go. They saw animals rise and fall, and they saw something that surprised them. Humans, small, weak, fragile creatures with no claws, no fangs, no armor, creatures that should have died 1,000 times over. But they did not die. They built fires when the cold came. They made tools when their bodies were not enough. They worked together when they could not survive alone. They refused to give up. The ancient beings were impressed. In all their travels across the stars, they had never seen anything quite like humans. Other species had strength or speed or intelligence, but humans had something else, something harder to define. They called it will. The will to continue when everything said they should stop. The will to hope when hope seemed foolish. The vision shifted again. Saw the ancient beings in their own world, a planet of impossible beauty with cities that floated in the sky and technology that seemed like magic. But something was wrong. The cities were empty. The beings were fewer than before. They were dying, slowly and inevitably, and they did not know why. They searched for a cure. They searched for answers. They searched for a way to save themselves, but nothing worked. Their civilization, millions of years old, was coming to an end. In their final years, they made a decision. They could not save themselves, but perhaps they could save their knowledge. They built ships, filled them with everything they had learned, and sent them to worlds where young species were growing. Species that had the will to survive. Species that might carry the torch when they were gone. One ship came to Earth. It waited in the ice, hidden and patient for the right moment, for humans to grow, for humans to be ready. The vision faded. Found himself back in the chamber, his hand still on the crystal. Tears were running down his face, though he did not remember crying. The others were staring at him, their expressions a mix of fear and wonder. "What did you see?" asked. Told them. He told them about the ancient beings, about their observation of Earth, about their dying civilization and their final gift. When he finished, the room was silent. "The crystal," said finally, "it contains their knowledge." Nodded everything they knew. Technology, science, medicine, history, they left it all for us. They wanted us to have it. Why us? Asked. Why humans? Because they saw what we are, replied. They watched us survive things that should have killed us. They saw us refuse to give up when giving up was the only sensible choice. They believed in us when we were nothing but primitive animals huddling around fires. And now they want us to prove them right. There was more. The crystal had shown him something else, something darker, but he was not ready to share that yet, not until he understood it better, not until he could figure out what it meant. For now, it was enough to know that humanity had been given a gift from beings who had watched them from the stars, who had believed in them when belief seemed foolish. The crystal pulsed gently in the dim light, waiting to share its secrets, waiting for humans to be ready to receive them. The real question was whether they would be. The news could not be contained. Within weeks, the whole world knew that something had been found beneath the Arctic ice. Governments it at first, then admitted it, then tried to control the story. Nothing worked. The truth was too big, too important, too impossible to hide. Representatives from every major nation arrived at the site. Scientists, politicians, military leaders, religious figures. Everyone wanted to see the ship. Everyone wanted to understand what it meant. The small research station that had called home for years became the center of the world. Meetings were held in crowded rooms. Arguments echoed through corridors that had once been quiet. Found himself pulled in 100 different directions, asked to explain what he had seen, what he had learned, what the crystal contained. He answered as best he could, but the truth was that he barely understood it himself. The crystal's knowledge was vast beyond imagining. It held the secrets of technologies that could transform human civilization, clean energy that would never run out, medical treatments that could cure diseases thought incurable, methods of travel that could take humanity to the stars. All of it was there, waiting to be unlocked. But unlocking it was not simple. The information was stored in forms that human minds could barely process. It would take years, maybe decades, to translate it into something useful. And there were other problems too. "We cannot share this," one of the military representatives argued during a heated meeting. "Whoever controls this technology will control the world. We must secure it for our nation. If you try to keep it for yourself, others will take it by force," another replied. "The only way to prevent war is to share it with everyone." Share it with everyone. And what happens when terrorists get their hands on it, when criminals use it, when nations that hate us build weapons from it? The arguments went in circles, getting nowhere, solving nothing. Grew tired of listening to them. He spent more and more time inside the ship, studying the crystal, trying to understand the message it held. It was during one of these quiet sessions that he discovered the warning. He had been exploring the deeper layers of the crystal's knowledge, the parts that were harder to access, the parts that seemed to be protected somehow. His mind had grown more attuned to the alien information over the weeks, and he could navigate it more easily now. He found histories of other worlds, other species that the ancient beings had encountered. Most were stories of growth and achievement, of civilizations rising to join the community of stars. But some were different, some were stories of endings. There was a presence in the galaxy, the crystal told him, something old and hungry and patient. The ancient beings called it by a name that translated roughly as the Hollow. It was not a species in the way understood the word. It was more like a force, a collection of entities that moved through space consuming everything in their path. The Hollow did not attack civilizations at their peak. They waited until species were advanced enough to be noticed but not advanced enough to defend themselves. They waited until the time was right. Then they came, and they fed, and they moved on. The galaxy was littered with the ruins of worlds they had touched. The ancient beings had known about the Hollow. They had hidden from them for millions of years, staying quiet, keeping their presence small. But in the end, it had not been enough. The Hollow had found them anyway. That was the true reason their civilization fell. Not disease, not accident, not natural decline. They had been consumed, slowly and completely, by something they could not fight. Before they died, they had calculated how long Earth would have. Based on the rate of human development, based on the signals that a growing civilization would inevitably produce, they estimated that the Hollow would notice Earth within 200 years of humans developing certain technologies. Technologies like nuclear weapons, like radio transmissions, like the signals that had been leaking from Earth for the past century. The clock had already started. Humanity had perhaps 200 years before the Hollow came, maybe less. This was the true gift the ancient beings had left. Not just knowledge, but a warning. Not just technology, but time. The ship had been buried in ice specifically to delay its discovery, to give humans time to grow strong enough before they learned the truth. Now that truth was out, and the countdown had begun. Shared what he had learned with the others. The arguing stopped. The political games paused. For the first time since the discovery, everyone in the room was united by a single emotion: fear. 200 years, said quietly. That is not very long. Long enough, replied. If we use it wisely, if we work together, if we do not waste time fighting among ourselves. You are asking for a miracle, said. You are asking humanity to set aside thousands of years of conflict and competition, to unite against an enemy we have never seen, that might not come for generations. I am asking humanity to be what we have always been, said. Survivors. When the ice ages came, we survived. When diseases swept through our populations, we survived. When we faced extinction again and again, we found a way to continue. The ancient beings saw that in us. They believed we could do it again. The only question is whether we believe it ourselves. The room was silent. Outside, the Arctic wind continued its eternal howling, indifferent to the concerns of the small creatures who had gathered in its domain. The ship sat in its chamber of ice, patient and waiting, its gift and its burden now fully revealed. Humanity had a choice to make. They could continue as they had always done, divided and suspicious, fighting over scraps while something vast and hungry waited in the darkness. Or they could become something new, something worthy of the faith that ancient beings had placed in them 40,000 years ago. The decision would not be made in this room, new. It would be made in 1,000 rooms, in 1,000,000 conversations, in the slow turning of human hearts toward either hope or despair. All he could do was point the way and trust that his species would find its path. He looked at the faces around him, saw fear and uncertainty, but also something else, something that looked like the beginning of determination. It was not much, but it was a start. 1 year had passed since the discovery. The world was different now, changed in ways both visible and invisible. The arguments had not stopped entirely. They probably never would. Humans were still humans, stubborn and proud and prone to conflict. But something had shifted in the collective consciousness of the species, a subtle change in direction that gave hope. The technology from the crystal was being shared. Not perfectly, not without complications, but it was happening. An international body had been formed to study the ancient knowledge and distribute it fairly among all nations. There were still disputes about access and control, still moments when old habits of competition threatened to destroy the fragile cooperation. But the disputes were resolved, one by one, because everyone understood what was at stake. The first fusion reactor came online on a cold morning in December. It was small, just a prototype, built from principles found in the crystal's data. Watched the ceremony from a screen in his office at the research station. Scientists and leaders from a dozen countries stood together as the reactor hummed to life, producing clean energy with an efficiency that had seemed impossible just 2 years ago. It was a beginning, just a small step, but it proved that the gift could be used, that human minds could learn the ancient knowledge and put it into practice. Other projects were across the world, medical research that promised to cure diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries, new materials that would make construction safer and cheaper, communication systems that would connect the most remote places on Earth. And somewhere, in secret facilities that was not supposed to know about, work had begun on defense systems, because the warning had not been forgotten. The hollow was still out there, waiting in the darkness between stars. Humanity was preparing for a threat that might not come for generations, building weapons they hoped they would never need to use. Had taken over leadership of the research team studying the ship. She spent most of her time in the ice chamber now, learning the vessel's secrets one by one. There was still so much they did not understand. The ship's power source, which had kept it functional for 40,000 years. The technology that allowed it to float without support. The method by which it had preserved itself against the crushing pressure of the ice. Each mystery was a puzzle, and solving each puzzle brought new understanding. We could build our own ships, told during one of their conversations. Not yet, not for years, but eventually. The knowledge is there. We just need to learn how to use it. Ships to go where? Asked. Anywhere, everywhere. The stars, if we are brave enough. The ancient beings traveled across the galaxy. We could do the same if we had enough time. Time? Everything came back to time. 200 years, maybe less. It seemed like forever and like nothing at all. Thought about all the things humanity had accomplished in the last 200 years, the incredible pace of change from horse-drawn carriages to spacecraft. If they could do that without help, what could they do with the gift they had been given? He walked outside and looked up at the Arctic sky. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the ice in shades of gold and pink. Above him, the first stars were beginning to appear, faint points of light in the darkening blue. Somewhere among those stars, an ancient civilization had watched Earth and seen something worth saving. Somewhere among those stars, something hungry was waiting. Did not feel afraid, he felt determined. The door opened behind him and stepped out. The quiet geophysicist had become one of the most important figures in the research effort, his careful mind perfectly suited to the slow work of translating alien knowledge into human understanding. He stood beside and followed his gaze upward. The crystal contained a final message, said. I found it yesterday, buried deep in the data. I was not sure whether to share it. Tell me, said. It was from their leader, the one who decided to send the ships. They recorded it just before the end when they knew there was no hope left for their species. They said they had watched many worlds, many species. Some had disappointed them. Some had shown promise but failed when tested. But humans were different. Different how? They said that humans had something no other species possessed, a kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat was certain. They had seen humans face impossible odds again and again and somehow find a way through. Ice ages, famines, wars that should have destroyed them. Every time, humans survived. Every time, humans came back stronger. Paused, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. They said that if any species could face the hollow and survive, it would be us. Not because we were the strongest but because we never stopped trying. Because giving up was simply not in our nature. Felt something warm in his chest, a feeling that might have been pride or might have been hope. The ancient beings had believed in humanity when humans were nothing but primitive creatures struggling to survive in a hostile world. That belief had carried across 40,000 years, surviving the death of an entire civilization, waiting in the ice until humans were ready to receive it. He thought about all the challenges ahead, the political conflicts that would never fully end, the fear and suspicion that would threaten cooperation, the vast unknown of an enemy they could barely imagine. It would be hard. It might be impossible, but that had never stopped humanity before. The stars grew brighter as the sky darkened. Somewhere out there, signals from Earth were spreading through space, announcing humanity's presence to anyone listening. The clock was running. The countdown had begun, but looked at those stars and felt something other than fear. He felt ready. The ancient beings had given humanity a gift and a warning. They had shown faith in a species they would never meet. Now it was time for that species to prove them right, not through great heroics or single moments of triumph, but through the slow, steady work of building something that could last, something that could face the darkness and survive. Turned and walked back inside. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And somewhere in the ice below, an ancient ship kept its patient watch, its mission finally complete, its gift finally delivered to the species that had earned it. Humanity had faced the void before. They would face it again, and they would not be alone. The memory of those who had believed in them would guide them forward, a light in the darkness, a promise that some things were worth saving. The future was uncertain. It always had been. But for the first time in human history, humanity faced that uncertainty together, united by knowledge and purpose, and the stubborn will to survive that had carried them through every challenge before. The stars were waiting, and humanity was ready to answer.